Hello, my name is Damsil Kim, and I will be presenting my research paper titled Interpreting the Textual and Rhetorical Features in Korean Division Films with Construal Level Theory. Now let's begin. Resembling the modern history of Korea, Korean domestic film industry also went through hardships, such as brutal censorship and post-production cuts. It was only after the obstacles of severe censorship were judged illegal under the Constitution in 1996 that the free spirit of filmmakers could infuse their creativity and originality into the films. From that time on, statistics show that Korean film industry has grown exponentially. One thing to note here is that this rapid growth credited to a film called Shiri. Films with plots and themes derived from the divided state of Korea are often called 분단 영화. After Shiri, films that build their storyline around Korea's divided state became a staple type in Korean film industry. Now, these division films are considered one of the most popular types in Korean film industry, and they come in various forms of genres, such as romance, drama, action, comedy, buddy movie, and war movies. Among these variations, this research specifically aims to explore Korean division box office action films and how they reflect the society of our armistice of 70 years. This research is meaningful because, for one, division films are a huge part of Korean film industry, and two, division films are not yet academically reviewed sufficiently, and three, division films reflect psychological state of South Korea toward the North and thus reveal the shared sentiment of the masses. Korean division box office action films are the targets of the analysis in this study, since action division films are the most frequently produced, the most successful, and consumed by the largest number of viewers compared to other types of Korean division films. Hence, Korean division box office action films, and especially the shared rhetoric that they showcase, becomes a window for this study to look into the sentiments of the public concerning the divided state of Korean Peninsula. This research examined 4 box office division films that was produced in the last decade. And unlike earlier day division films, where North Koreans were depicted as evil and demon-like, these films depicted North Koreans with rosy colors, and that seems to have become a trend in South Korea. When we look at shows like Crash Landing on You, there have been series of studies about representation of North Koreans in South Korean films in the field of film studies and cultural studies. These studies connected historical, cultural, political, and social changes in South Korea with the changes in the description of North Koreans shown in South Korean films. In this study, however, it explores the changes occurring in the minds of South Korean viewers from social psychological aspect. For this purpose, this research adopted the principle of the Construal level theory by Trope and Lieberman to see how the psychological distance South Koreans have towards North Korea is aligned with such changes in South Korean films that represent North Korea. According to Construal level theories, people's psychological distance to an issue or an entity is influenced by their construal level of that issue or entity. Construal level means the level of abstraction at which the issue is mentally represented and it is positively correlated with a psychological distance. That is, the higher the level of construal is, the more abstract, generic, superordinate, and discontextualized mental representation of an issue becomes in our minds, and people perceive greater psychological distance to that issue. Moving from concrete representation, that means low-level construal, to a more abstract representation, high-level construal, involves the process of omitting features that are deemed incidental, focusing on superordinate and abstract features and representations. Also, high-level construal creates fewer and broader groups when categorizing entities, while low-level construal creates narrow groups of entities. In addition, higher-level construal often results in unwarranted optimism about the future. This research uses CLT as a theoretical framework to better understand how and why South Korean division films choose to neglect the unstable and risky relationship between North and South Korea, but instead optimistically fantasize and construe North Korea with naive and optimistic attitude. According to construal level theory, there are 4 different dimensions of psychological distance: spatial, social, temporal, and hypothetical dimensions of psychological distance. Spatial distance is one of primary dimension of psychological distance. Usually, when physical spatial distance is near, psychological spatial distance is also construed as close. However, this logic does not apply to South and North Korea, and their perceived psychological spatial distance is quite distant, though their physical distance is close. In fact, South Koreans perceive North Korea as a remote place far from themselves that cannot be seen or reached. Furthermore, the fact that other dimensions of psychological distance, for example, social, hypothetical, and temporal, all increasingly lengthened as the armistice made actual spatial distance become increasingly less important in the overall psychological distance. Indeed, after 7 decades of separation and North Korea's isolating themselves from the world, various dimensions of psychological distance continued to become more distant. The temporal, 70 years of separation, and social, there is now an economical, ideological, and cultural gap, and this gap has greatly increased during those 70 years. And as for hypothetical distance, most South Koreans think that there's very low likability of North Korea's collapse or Second Korean War. Of course, again, as for spatial psychological distance, North Korean border cannot be crossed with a traveling visa like the rest of the world. And so the distance, the psychological distance in all these 4 areas increased. After examining how North Korean characters are represented in the films and what role the relationship between South and North Korean protagonists play in most recent Korean division box office films, it was found that in recent films, ethnic bond between South and North Koreans are weakened, so the bloodline nationalism is not as highlighted as before. In its place, general and abstract bond, such as love, pursuit of happiness and peace is represented as the common trait between South and North Korean character. Such a change aligns with the high-level Construal features because the high Construal focuses on more superordinate features like being human than low Construal features like having the same ancestry. In addition, low Construal tends to focus more on the means and the how, whereas high Construal tends to focus more on the end goal and the why. This corresponds to one of the main findings of this research, that recent Korean division box office films no longer focus on discourse of unification, but emphasizes achieving peace by accepting and letting the differences to coexist. In earlier movies, when North Korea was associated with more low-level construals, North Korean characters were depicted as unforgivable enemy and all-around evil. When we come to late 90s, with post-Cold War Korea flourishing in both economy and true democratic freedom, Korean division films pictured North Korean characters as sympathetic victims of war and North Korean regime. The effect of increased distance and abstract construal is shown in the way films depict North Koreans. North Korean characters became more heroic, powerful, and attractive problem-solving main characters in most recent Korean division box office films, as the psychological distance increased and so the abstract construal increased also. More importantly, due to increased distance, 통일, unification became an abstract thought instead of a concrete and complex goal. And now, the imagined future of Korea is guided by humanitarian values, superseding local values such as bloodline nationalism. Now the conclusion. Based on the analysis, Korean division box office films have changed, and this change aligns with the increased psychological distance viewers have towards North Korea. Within the analysis, the research suggested 통일, meaning harmonizing and coexisting with differences, became the backbone of Korean division box office films. This suggestion is supported by the recent Korean division box office films, where both South and North Korean characters show intercultural competence. Each recognizes and accepts the other's differences and does not intend to force the other to change or correct. This attitude, in turn, allows both South and North Koreans to achieve harmony and friendship, through which they manage to arrive at their personal peace and, in a broader sense, national peace. Hence, the key for peace is 통일, embracing the differences, even with ideological differences, not 통일. North Korea, being separated from the rest of the world and isolated for 70 years, increased the psychological distance between two Koreas. With increased temporal, social, hypothetical, and spatial distance, more abstract representation of North Korea and unification became the new norm. In addition, due to greater psychological distance than prior generation, general features and values such as love and friendship overrides 민족주의 ethnic race nationalism. And thank you for listening.